Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Amy Samp. I am the Health Education Project Specialist with the Maxwell and Eleanor Blum Patient Family Learning Center at Mass General Hospital. Before we get started, just wanted to go over a few items with you all. Please note that today's session is being recorded for educational purposes. If you're interested in viewing the recording, you may visit the Blum Center website at massgeneral.org/Blum-Center. Please note that everyone is in listen-only mode. Everyone has been muted so that we can hear our guest speakers today. If you have any questions for our guest speakers, you may use the chat feature located at the bottom of your screen. We'll have time for them in the end. Only the Blum Center staff and our guest speakers will see your questions. Please do not share any personal medical questions or information in the chat box. If you have a personal medical question, please ask your doctor. All right, so next I'm going to hand it over to Rabbi Shulamit Eisen and Reverend Everika Rose Long. They are with the MGH Spiritual Care Department, and they are going to lead today's session on moving towards spiritual wellness in time of loss.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Amy. As Amy shared, my name is Reverend Erica Rose Long. I'm one of the spiritual care providers here at Mass General Hospital. And to sort of introduce myself and open this space, I think I just wanted to share with you all how I'm feeling in terms of my own spiritual wellness right now. So as I'm sure many of us are very aware, we are now at the 2-year mark of the COVID pandemic. Also, we are at a time where our world is facing a great deal of war and violence and suffering. So I would say that right now I feel pretty connected to myself and to my own feelings. I feel pretty connected to sort of my inner circle, but I feel a little disconnected from my higher power, from the sacred. It's hard for me to make meaning of the suffering in the world right now. And I also feel sort of, I'm connected to that inner circle, but I feel some disconnection from people beyond that circle. I feel like living in isolation for the past 2 years, my world has started to feel very small. And so that's where I'm feeling in my spiritual wellness. And I'm curious, Shulamit, about you and your spiritual wellness today.
Yeah. So hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here with you. My name is Rabbi Shulamit Eisen, and I'm a CP educator in the Spiritual Care Department. And, Erica, there is so much going on in the world. What's interesting for me is I'm pregnant, so I have a lot going on inside. And so my world is very inner focused. So I would say right now where the connection is actually the most towards the divine, because I'm feeling really grateful that this baby is growing and is due in a month. And I'm feeling connected to others because I'm receiving so much care and love in a way that I would never have expected. And maybe if there's any disconnection, it's with self, because I feel like there's some grief. I'm losing something of myself just as I'm about to gain something. And that's different than how it usually is for me. Usually it's a different constellation of connection and disconnection. So yeah, thanks for asking. So we'd love to start our session with really, since we can't see you, we want to hear your voices. So we're going to invite you to use the chat feature, and Eric and I will be able to see it. And we would love you to put one word in the chat or one phrase about what's coming up for you as you enter the session on spiritual wellness, as we talk about spiritual connection and disconnection, spiritual distress and spiritual wellness. So if you would just put one word in the chat about how you're feeling, and we'll read them out. Okay, I'll read them as they come in. So there's a feeling of connection, a feeling of hopefulness, a feeling of sadness. Yeah, all feelings are welcome. Thank you for expressing the range. Just give one more second in case any more feelings are coming in. Some eagerness, some grief, some need, a feeling of uncertainty, confusion. Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for being open to where you are. And I hope that just sharing where you are creates a sense of community, even though we can't see each other right now. So we're going to start with sharing a little bit about spiritual wellness. So I'm going to invite Erica to put up some slides. Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Erica. So we're speaking today about spiritual wellness. And perhaps the clearest way to start speaking about spiritual wellness is to speak about its partner, spiritual distress. And we can understand spiritual wellness and spiritual distress in terms of connection and the experience of meaning and purpose. So if you look at the first slide about spiritual distress, you'll see that a definition of spiritual distress is a state of suffering related to the impaired ability to experience meaning in life through connections with self, others, the world, or a superior being. And we would say the sacred even beyond a superior being. And so some ways that you might know that you're feeling disconnected from self include feelings of shame or guilt, feelings of low self-esteem, a sense of divine punishment, disgust or alienation from one's body or deepest being. Disconnection from others may include feelings of abandonment by one's family, friends, or community, a withdrawal from relationships, loneliness, isolation. And disconnection from the sacred may include feelings of abandonment by or anger at God or a higher power, loss of direction or interest in highest values, deep and persistent doubt, an inability or unwillingness to engage in practices of one's tradition or spiritual self-care. So I want to highlight, before we turn to spiritual wellness, that states of disconnection and seasons of disconnection are normal and natural. And acute stress or prolonged stress, like Erica mentioned, being in this pandemic, being in a time of war in the world right now, or even times of transition, whether they be, joyful transitions or difficult transitions, can surface these feelings of disconnection. So let's look now at our wheels of connection. So when we are connected to self, to others, and to the sacred, you'll see right in the middle, we have an increased sense of experiencing meaning and purpose in our lives. And for us, when we are connected to others, self, and sacred, that's when we are in the richness of our spirituality. So we like to use a definition of spirituality that's on the screen: the dynamic aspect of human life that relates to the way persons, individuals, and community experience, express, and or seek meaning, purpose, and transcendence, and the way they connect to the moment, to self, to others, to nature, to the significant, and or the sacred. Spirituality is expressed through beliefs, values, traditions, and practices. And for us, when we're moving towards connection to self, others, and the sacred, what we experience and what we're looking for is an increased sense of aliveness, a sense of nourishment, of zestiness, of wanting more connection, that the connection leads to greater connection, feeling more productive, feeling more clear, and feeling more like ourselves. And all of this gives us increased access to our sense of meaning and purpose in the world. And so when we're talking about spiritual wellness, this is what we're talking about: feeling more alive, feeling more connected to our meaning and purpose, and wanting more of it because it tastes really good. So Eric and I thought it would be useful to say a word about how our training as spiritual care providers helps us be with people and ourselves in states of distress and wellness, and wherever we all are in the continuum between them. So spiritual care providers, in most places, spiritual care providers are called chaplains, train in something called CPE. CPE stands for Clinical Pastoral Education. And I'm a CPE educator, and Erica is a board certified chaplain, and so she has done a lot of CPE. And what's special about CPE is it has a method of learning called action, reflection, action. And so we're always doing, reflecting on it, and then trying again with our integrated knowing from our reflection. And the main work of CPE, if I had to say it in a sentence, is to learn to stay with whatever emotion is present in ourselves and in the other, the person we're working with. And that is remarkably difficult because as humans, we have the impulse to fix, to make better, to compare. So I don't know about you. I hope it's not just me, but I get so frustrated when I'm trying to share how I'm feeling with someone, whether I'm hurt or angry or sad, and they respond with, well, have you thought of doing X? Or You'll get over it soon, Shulamit. Like, just keep moving on. Or they tell me a story about themselves that turns away from the feeling that I'm expressing. And what we know as spiritual care providers is that a healing salve is the ability to be with what is, and to welcome it gently and non-judgmentally. And the mantra of clinical pastoral education, CPE, is to trust the process. And we know that healing and the movement from disconnection to connection takes time. We know that it's not linear. And it takes a bravery to not rush through whatever is truly alive and present in the moment, however spiritually uncomfortable that might be. We trust the process and know we can't rush the process. We know that states of connection and disconnection are like the tides, in and out, and then in and out again, seasons of our lives, moments, however long they take. And our training as chaplains is to be with what is, both in ourselves and with the people we're working with. So as humans, we have the proclivity to tell ourselves stories about whatever suffering or disconnection we're experiencing. And that story that we're saying about what's happening often adds more pain to whatever is. So for example, I'm single, which is a source of sadness for me. And it's very easy to go to stories about that, whether it's what's wrong with me that I'm single, or to get angry at God. How come you haven't blessed me in this way that I desire? And the story that I'm creating about it, about what simply is, right? It's just a fact that I'm single, becomes unnecessary suffering. And so the invitation of CPE, and when you're with a chaplain, is to have a wide-armed embrace. And that embrace of whatever is can be me whenever I'm in conversation with myself, when I'm in conversation with a chaplain, with a therapist, whoever I'm with, to just let what is be. And for us, that movement to just being with what is a movement towards wellness. So even if the suffering still exists, when we're not fighting against it, and we're just welcoming it and being in conversation with it, gently, lovingly, curiously, that in and of itself is movement to spiritual wellness. And I want to be really clear that when we're with whatever is, it doesn't mean that it's lessening the suffering, right? It doesn't mean the reality of the suffering changes at all, but it means that the experience of the suffering might. And because we're not adding layers of anger or anxiety on top of what simply is. So for example, as I mentioned, I'm pregnant, and every morning I throw up. Every morning. I do not like throwing up. And if you asked me before I was pregnant, I would name that vomiting is on my list of fears. And what I notice now is that the experience of throwing up every morning is different if I brace against it. That is, if I think about how it's going to happen and I try to fight it. And I think, don't happen, not today. Let's not, no. If I just let it be, then it is, and then it's over until the next day. And I can say, oh, that again. Okay, hello, good morning. Here we are. So with that as an introduction about how we view spiritual distress and spiritual wellness, Eric and I would like to share stories of the movement towards spiritual wellness in our lives. And Erica, I was wondering if you could start, and if you could share a story about when connection with others helped you move towards spiritual wellness.
I would love to, Shulamit. So when I think about a time that connection to others helped me move towards spiritual wellness, the first group of others that comes to mind for me is my church community. And it's a type of connection that has developed over years. I've been a part of my church for 8.5 years, but when I think about the growth that's happened and the movement that's happened over that time, it is profound for me. It is something that feels, I don't know, it makes me want to cry sometimes, to be honest. So when I moved to Boston 8.5 years ago, I was experiencing a lot of loss and grief at that time. In order to move to Boston, I had left behind a community of people that I really loved, where I felt like I belonged. And I also left behind meaningful work that meant a lot to me. And I came here to go to school so I could do more meaningful work. I actually want to do the work that I'm doing today, which is excellent the way it worked out for me. But at the time, I was taking required courses for grad school. I missed my friends, I missed my community, and I just felt very disconnected and I felt very sad. And I found my church actually because I was looking for a job. I needed money. And I got a job working with the children in my congregation. And I think I was maybe 23 at the time. And I don't know if any of y'all can relate to this, either when you were 23 or at different points in your life. I was really at a point in my life where I interacted with children very rarely. I had been in college, I've been in grad school. I was like in this bubble of people who were all the same age as me. And so having the opportunity to work with children again, it brought this new life and this new joy that I was not expecting and that I really needed when I was feeling sad and when I was having a hard time connecting to others. And I would say another layer of that for me at that time is not only was I connecting to children, I was connecting to elders, I was connecting to people who I would never have met otherwise if we weren't going to the same church. And that was really powerful for me. And to be in worship together, to be in the sanctuary together, it also became a container where I could feel my feelings in the presence of others without feeling ashamed. Right. So in other places of my life, I was really trying to say, I'm competent, I can do the work. I'm not scared to be here. I'm not sad. But when I went to church, it was a place where I could sit in a pew and I could cry, or I could laugh, or I could feel righteous anger about injustices in the world. And I could feel that with other people next to me. And I could look around and maybe I wasn't even talking to anyone else right away, but I could see other people feeling the same thing as me. And that was really powerful. And I think that was the first year experience of just moving towards wellness in this community. And since then, it continues to be a place that I go to every Sunday virtually now, mostly virtually, to find that connection. And I would say that along with how it makes me feel connected to others, it is a place that also really connects me to my values, holds me accountable to what I believe in, and inspires me to serve the world, to try to make the world a better place, and also really inspires me to be more compassionate to myself and to others. So I could just keep going on. There have been times when it's bumpy too. It's not always easy. It's not always, I wake up on Sunday mornings and think I don't want to go. This past Sunday, I was like, maybe I'll go to the grocery store instead. But then I logged on and we had a soloist named Hannah, who at the beginning of the pandemic, she was a student here at Berkeley and she was sent back to Japan. And I'd say for the first year and a half of the pandemic, she would join us with her father from Japan on Zoom every Sunday to sing for us. And this past Sunday, she was in the pews. She was back in Boston for the first time. And we just all clapped for her and cried, and she cried. And I was watching from home and I was like, man, if I hadn't gone, I would have missed this moment. So I just feel very grateful for that connection.
Oh, how rich. Thank you for sharing that.
And with that said, Shulamit, I was wondering if you could share with us a time when connection with self helped you move toward spiritual wellness.
Yeah, and I think this is also a story about connection with others and with myself. Pretty personal, but if I think about this year and where I really had the most spiritual distress, it was in April. I finally, at the age of 37, decided that I couldn't wait anymore for a child. I just wanted a baby so badly. And so I tried for the first time, doing it solo. And I was so sure that as soon as I tried, God was going to say, like, okay, you said yes, and I'm going to say yes to you. And I was convinced I was pregnant. Wow, I can feel my tearfulness telling this. And I wasn't. I checked all the time and I wasn't. And when it was confirmed that I wasn't, I just went into this sense of grief. It was kind of as though I had a miscarriage. Like I was just so sure on every level that I was pregnant. And I didn't want to try again. And months went by and a mentor of mine was over, who's now a friend. And she said, when are you going to try again, Shulamit? And I said, I'm going to wait until I'm done grieving. And she was like, remember, remember that you have been wanting this child your entire life. Like, why do you need to wait till you're done grieving? And I said to her, Sarah, I can't even feel my desire right now. My grief is so great. And she said, I'm going to remind you of your desire. You can't touch it, but I remember it and I'm holding it for you and I'm showing you. Don't wait. Don't wait. And that next month I tried, and thank God I got pregnant. And I just think about how I would probably still be waiting if it wasn't for that reflection, having someone who knew me and could hold my story when I felt so disconnected from myself. And I'm just always amazed by the power of connection, a power, as we say in internal family systems, of being a hope merchant. She held hope for me when I was feeling pretty hopeless. Yeah. So we've shared some stories, and now we're going to talk about SGTOs. So, as we've spoken about, spiritual wellness has a personal component and has a sense of meaning and purpose, and a relational component, a sense of connection to self, to others, and the sacred. And so far, we've been talking about sacred and haven't defined it. And Eric and I really want to broaden what sacred is today. So we want to talk about sacred as something greater than oneself, an SGTO, something greater than oneself. And I want to give gratitude to Reverend Mary Martha Teal for teaching me about SGTOs. So something greater than oneself. So for many of us in America, when we think about something greater than oneself, we think about God or a higher power. SGTOs are much broader than that, and of course can include that. And we often have a number of SGTOs in our lives. So for example, for many of us, family is an SGTO. Community, our vocation, I think for Erica and I, we would both say the work we do is something greater than ourselves. For some people, an ancestral homeland. I know for me, as someone Jewish in America, Israel is an SGTO. It could be Ireland, Italy, anywhere in the world that your family comes from, and there's mythic stories about it. Even sports teams here in Boston, often the Red Sox, the Patriots are SGTOs. For some of us, pets are SGTOs. Really, it's very broad. The arts, anything that connects us to a community or something beyond ourselves that gives us sustenance. And when we're in times of acute stress or pandemic, it's so easy to disconnect or to be disconnected from our SGTOs. And as spiritual care providers, when we listen to people's stories, we listen for the SGTOs and wonder about the sources of strength and sustenance in them, even if they're not accessible in the same way that they once were. So, I think what's really interesting as we listen to people in the hospital is that, often people can't do their SGTOs in the same way, right? You might not be able to do your vocation or go to a Red Sox game or eat Nona's lasagna. But what we can do as spiritual care providers is we can ask questions to try to help you enter that SGTO, to live into it, and to taste it even if you're not there, right? Like, how did your Nona make the lasagna? What did it smell like? What did the first bite taste like? Now, it's not the same, but what we try to do is link people back and find creative ways to say, okay, maybe it can't look the same right now. It's COVID, you can't go visit your Nona. But how could we draw you back into connection with your SGTO? And so we're really curious, Eric and I, about this group that's gathered right here. What are the things that are greater than yourself that you draw on? So we're going to take a poll, and Erica's going to put the poll up, and we'll see in this group which categories come to mind.
Yeah, so you should have a pop-up on your screen that has a poll. It is multiple choice, so you can pick as many as you like and then submit it. And when we get our results, I will share it. I'll read those out loud. I think we'll all be able to see them too.
Oh, I'm so curious.
Give it a few more seconds for folks to enter their responses. All right, closing the poll.
All right, excellent. So it looks like family and nature and God are all pretty high for this group. We also have a number of folks who picked ancestors, animals or pets, and at least one person who picked sports. So I think it's just interesting to see, you know, where we have things in common, where we have things that are different. We also have, it looks like 2 people who said other. And I would be, as a chaplain, I'm just super curious about what that would be for someone. That's what I always, you know, want to know from the folks that I care for. But yeah, I think this is a great way to show exactly what Shulamit shared with us, that, you know, we can connect to something greater than ourselves, and it can be multiple things. It doesn't have to just be one thing. And it doesn't diminish, for example, if you're part of a faith tradition where, you know, God being your SGTO is a huge part of your belief system, that can be true, and family can also be true. It doesn't diminish the value of one. All right. So we have a poem to share with you all. So I'll pull it up on the screen and Shulamit will read it for us.
Okay. Lead by Mary Oliver. Here is a story to break your heart. Are you willing? This winter, the loons came to our harbor and died, one by one, of nothing we could see. A friend told me of one on the shore that lifted its head and opened the elegant beak and cried out in a long, sweet savoring of its life, which, if you have heard it, you know is a sacred thing, and for which, if you have not heard it, you had better hurry to where they still sing. And believe me, tell no one just where that is. The next morning, this loon, speckled and iridescent and with a plan to fly home to some hidden lake, was dead on the shore. I tell you this to break your heart, by which I mean only that it break open and never close again to the rest of the world.
Thank you, Shulamit. So we wanted to share that poem in part because this is a conversation about moving towards spiritual wellness in a time of loss. And we're all recognizing that this is a time of loss in many ways for us communally, collectively, and individually. And a lot of the things we've been talking about today about moving towards spiritual wellness, they're sort of these bigger ideas, right? So it's thinking about how do we connect to something greater than ourselves? How do we connect to community? How do we connect to our sense of self? And those are big ideas, right? So those are things that we journal about. Those are things that we pray on. Those are things we meditate over. Those are big things. Those are big questions that don't resolve all at once. And they're things that take practice. And at the same time, there are acute, intense moments in our lives where we need something to help us get through that moment, right? So I know I can speak for myself in times when I've been going through a lot of loss and grief. Maybe I'll wake up in the morning and on my walk to work, I just intensely feel sad, or I feel angry, or I feel afraid about an uncertain future. And in those moments, when we have those really intense feelings, it can be helpful to have a tool for spiritual wellness that we can use in the moment, something that's a little bit more practical. So I'm going to pull up another slide for us. All right, we'll just click through these real quick. Thank you. And those tools that I think of, I call spiritual practices. So a spiritual practice is any regular activity that you engage in with the intention of developing your spiritual life. And as you've seen from our definition of spirituality on earlier slides and through this conversation, spirituality is about connecting. It's about connecting to something greater than ourselves, connecting to ourselves, and connecting to others. So spiritual practices that you can see the list here. This is just a preliminary list. There are more practices that could be included. These are the activities that we can do in the moment to help us cope when we are feeling acutely overwhelmed, when we're feeling disconnected. So taking the time to breathe mindfully, to notice things around you. If you have a prayer practice, and there are so many different ways to pray, sometimes it's saying rote prayers that your ancestors have said for generations. Sometimes it's just opening your heart and speaking to your higher power. Walking in nature, moving your body, listening to music that helps you feel connected, reading sacred text or poetry. These are all different things that you can do in the moment to help you cope. I personally work on our inpatient psychiatric unit, and this is something that I do with patients a lot, is to think about what is a spiritual practice that can help you in the moment if you're feeling overwhelmed. What's something you can come back to that will help you find that sense of connection? And so I actually wanted to share one with you all today, and it takes a little bit of vulnerability for me, but I'm still excited to share it with you. So one of my primary spiritual practices is singing. I love to sing, and I'll be honest, when I'm having a hard day at work, sometimes I actually will sing in the stairwell or I'll hum in the elevator. It's the sensation in my body and also repeating words that are meaningful for me that helps me to sort of regulate my feelings, to feel a sense of connection. For me, I usually sing, either songs that are familiar to me from times with friends, or I sing hymns from church. And so I wanted to sing for you all today. This is one of my favorite hymns that we sing at church. It's called There Is More Love, and it's an African-American spiritual. And it's actually one of those songs where every time you sing through it, you replace the word love with something else. So, it starts with love, and then it goes to hope, and then it goes to peace, and it goes to joy. And I'm just going to sing this through maybe 3 times, just so you can hear it and so you can sort of see my experiences singing it. But I also want to invite you to join in. So if you are somewhere where you can sing out, I want to invite you to join me to feel what it feels like to sing. And let's just try this together, okay? There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere. All right, one more time. Sing along, hum along, or just listen, whatever feels right for you. There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere. All right. Excellent. Okay. Thank you all for doing that with me. And all right. So I know that we have some questions. We want folks to be able to ask questions if they can, if they have any questions. And I think first we would just like to do one more chatterfall. So I invite you to put in the chat, what is an intention that you have for your spiritual wellness? So after this time we've had today, what is an intention that you have for your spiritual wellness? And we'll share those with the group. So we have someone who is trying to make it their own and fit it into their lifestyle. We have folks who want to keep singing, journaling, someone who wants to feel able to feel some sense of hope in these times of uncertainty. We want to care for others, to personalize this experience, to spend time in nature. To live fully and richly. Beautiful. And even if you have one that you haven't put in the chat today, if you have an intention or a hope for your own spiritual wellness, I just want to say that I hold that for you, and I wish for you that you can move towards that direction for yourself. All right, now we have a way that we like to close this time together, but we have a little extra time. So if anyone has any questions for Shulamit or I about spiritual wellness in a time of loss, you can pop that in the chat and we'll be happy to answer it. So we'll give you all a little time to see if there's any questions. Excellent. So we have someone who asked, can these spiritual practices be done regularly, not just in a moment of sadness to help regulate my feelings? I would actually say yes. I think that spiritual practices, this is sort of my own professional opinion. From my experience and from my learning, I think spiritual practices can be the most impactful when we do them regularly. So whether that is daily or weekly, I think that finding a spiritual practice that you can do regularly and having that ritual and having that familiarity will only help you more in a moment of sadness or a moment when you need support in regulating your feelings. Oof. We have a really challenging question from someone. I don't know if you want to touch that. Maybe, yeah, we have someone who shared that they have a young granddaughter who has aggressive brain cancer and just struggling with how to cope with that.
Yeah, I feel like there's no good answer. And just to say that first, like, how could you cope well with that? And I think I would just invite you to be really gentle with yourself, with all that's coming up, with all of the fear, the anger, the hurt. I know that we find it very powerful to not have to cope with things alone, but to cope in relationship. And whether it be with a therapist or a religious figure or a support group, so that you don't have to keep things inside. But that's the kind of thing, to have a little one with an aggressive cancer, that I feel like any tool of coping would pale in comparison, really. So the invitation would just be to be honest about where you are, and that you don't have to be okay, and no one in your family has to be okay. I don't know if you want to add anything, Erica.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that Shulamit said. And yeah, I think finding places where you can be your authentic self and feel your feelings, whether that's, you know, being alone in nature or being in community with other people or with a therapist or a spiritual leader of some kind, I think can be really helpful. But yeah, that's really, really painful.
Yeah. So those are the questions we have. We also have a comment thanking us for being vulnerable. And I just want to pick up on that, especially because of what Erica just said, that I have found in our training that it's actually our vulnerability that helps us be free. And when we don't have to try and pretend that everything's okay when it's not, and we get to just be who we are and learn how to be in relationship and connections where we can be our messy human selves, that is, to me, the most powerful balm and salve that brings us towards wellness. So thank you. And another chaplain just wrote in as a suggestion for the person who's struggling with their granddaughter's cancer, that to find places where you can be embraced in love. And I think that's a great suggestion. Yes. Okay, well, we want to end with a blessing. So I'd love you to just imagine wherever you are that you are being wrapped in love and embraced in love. And we want to bless you that on your journey towards spiritual wellness, that you are able to live richly and fully, to live authentically as yourself, to embrace your vulnerability, to find practices that bring you zestiness and aliveness, whether that be being in nature or journaling or all the mysterious ways that we feel most alive in this world and in relationship. And we want to bless you with patience, whatever stage or journey or season you are on right now. And to know that everything is always moving and that all parts and everything you're feeling are welcome. May it be so, and may you go in peace. Amen.
Go in peace.
Erica, Shulamit, thank you so much for a wonderful session, for sharing your thoughts, for everything. It's truly great.
Thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you, Amy. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
And as I had mentioned earlier today, it is being recorded. So if you're interested in viewing the recording, you may visit the Blum Center website at massgeneral.org/Blum-Center. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.